shoes and walk among the groups of two. It's not ideal, it's just how we feel. It's a shame we're easily amused. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Cast a stone and get a hardcore view. Catchphrase of the day is that it's true. There's no coffee talk and only one way to please. It's a shame what you do moves me. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. Yeah, I'm not looking for a windswept view. Our change has changed. Nothing's new. Right heart, new song. That blues. The only cure for this forward motion is to make emotion fly away. The air is cold, but the water's not frozen. I see ripples rolling every day. If I could know what would do wrong, I'd take this smile. The only cure for this forward motion is this smile. The only cure for this forward motion is this smile. The only cure for this forward motion.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Rebellious 1776. My name is Lynn Hurley, and I am here. I had the weirdest feeling that my microphone wasn't on, but it is. That's good. I am here with you to critique, criticize, and fact check our nation's politicians in real time. We love watching a feisty congressional hearing around here. And if you know someone who would like to know just where their tax dollars are going, please feel free to share the love and share the show with them. Then sit back, grab yourself a little snack and a drink. It's a little early, so get yourself some coffee or tea or whatever it is you like to drink. And then if you're watching live, join us in the chat because we always have a great time talking about our nation's finest while they're in action. And if you like talking all things politics, why not hit that subscribe button? Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you always get notified whenever a new show is coming up. And I also do members only shows where we have a chance to talk about things a little more in depth, a little more one-on-one. We don't talk about hearings, but we do talk about what's going on that day, that week, whatever it is that is going on in this wacky world of ours. We talk about it. So if you don't want to miss out on those, please consider becoming a member. We would love to have you join the conversation. How are you guys this morning? Good morning. So we had such a fun show yesterday. I hope you had fun. I felt it was very cathartic. It was a lot of venting on my part. I'll be honest, there was some venting. But it was a good time. I had a great time chatting with you guys. There's some really good conversations going in the chat. It was going pretty quick, so I had a hard time keeping up with all of it. But it was a lot of fun. And today we've got two shows. We got two hearings. So this morning we are going to be looking at the Judiciary Committee. Let me check to make sure. Actually, let me just pull this up to make sure we don't miss it. So sometimes they start a little late, so we'll see how they do this morning. But it looks like they're going to be starting pretty soon. As it says, we will begin shortly. Here, I'll pull that down for right now. We're going to be watching a hearing entitled Oversight of the United States Marshals Service. What do you think? You think this is going to have to do with what's going on down in Texas? I kind of think I do believe that might have something to do with it, but we shall see. There's no description. The Judiciary Committee has been doing that lately, and it's very frustrating. So you kind of just have to guess based on the title and the witnesses. They only have one witness listed, which is Ronald L. Davis, Director of U.S. Marshals Service. So I don't know. And it's the Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance. So I don't know. I have a feeling they're going to be talking, if not about Texas, at least about what's going on with the illegal immigration situation that we have in this country, and that's putting it lightly. So maybe they're going to be talking about what's going on with the marshals and how they're dealing with that. I don't know. We'll see. We shall see. And then later today, we are going to be watching a hearing. See, there were two, and I was going back and forth on them. But I decided on, there was one about the Houthis and kind of their threat to Middle East security. And then there's another one about what is it? It's the federal, it's FISA, Federal Intelligence Security Act, I think is what it is, what that stands for. And they are looking to reform it. Basically, they don't want the FBI spying on you without a warrant. And right now, because of the Patriot Act, they can do that. And they are doing that. So there's a committee, the Freedom Caucus, they are trying to make sure that the FBI has to get a warrant in order to spy on you. And that vote is on Thursday. So what I'm thinking I might do is let's watch the Houthis, because they have some good, they're going to have some good witnesses in that one. They've got the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, a former CIA analyst, an NSC director from the Persian Gulf, a senior vice president for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So I think that's going to be a really, really interesting one. So I think we're going to do the Houthis this afternoon. That'll be at 2. And then we will maybe do the FISA committee hearing tomorrow. And then the vote, they are actually taking a vote on the reform, whatever they decide today, however they word that, the reform. They're going to take a vote on that tomorrow evening. So maybe tomorrow will just be a FISA sort of day. Yes. Thank you, Snoopy. Last night, some good news came out. The House did impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Yes, they did. So we shall see. Is it going to go anywhere in the Senate? Probably not. It's a Democratic majority, but it is going to be interesting to watch the hearing. I cannot wait for that. So they have some really good prosecutors that are coming from the Republicans in the House. I know Mark Green, who is the chairman of the Homeland Security, who has been overseeing this whole investigation into Secretary Mayorkas. He's going to be one of the prosecutors for the House Republicans in the Senate. during the hearing. So I can't wait. It's going to be really, really interesting. I'm excited for that one. Now I don't know when that's going to be, but we shall see. We shall see. And then as far as the Senate National Security Act, I think it's called, no, National Security Bill. I can't remember. It's National Security something. It's basically their bullshit foreign aid bill that the Senate just passed, and which has nothing, not 1 cent, not 1 cent for our own border. So how's that for national security? Um, Nothing for the border, but plenty for Ukraine's borders. And it's got Israel and Taiwan all mixed in there together. And I heard Matt Gaetz say, you know what, why are these all mixed together? We really should be looking at each of these things individually. And I think he's absolutely right. And you know what? There was a really interesting thing that I saw this morning. Let me see if I still have it up. Here it is. Let's watch this while we're waiting. If I can get this. Oh, sir, wait 1 minute. It's about 10 minutes, and dang it. All right, hold on just a second. Let's share this tab instead. All right, hold on a second, guys. I'm gonna see what I'm doing. We're gonna add this to stage. Let's take a look at this. So this is James Comer and Jim Jordan and someone else. I can't see it at the moment because I'm looking at you guys. Hey, Cindy. They're talking about, they interviewed Tony Bobolinsky, who's the best name. He was born to be a mobster. I don't think he is, but should have been. It's like good old school mobster name, right? They interviewed him in the process of investigating the Biden impeachment, and really, really interesting stuff. So let's take a quick look and see what they had to say while we're waiting for that Judiciary Committee to hurry on up. Let me know if you guys can hear this okay.
We have the three lawmakers that are leading the Biden impeachment inquiry. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith. Congressman Comer, we'll start with you tonight. Tony Bobolinsky, the big guy. Biden was the business. What did you learn today?
Well, we learned a lot, and Tony Bobolinsky handled himself very well. I've never seen Democrats or anyone act worse in a deposition than they did. The Democrats couldn't handle the truth, and that's what Tony Bobolinsky delivered today. He delivered the truth. He talked about Joe's involvement. He talked about the numerous times he talked to Joe Biden. He mentioned that Joe Biden thanked him for what he was doing with his brother and his son. So Joe Biden knew very well the role Tony Bobolinsky was playing in the Biden orbit. And he talked about what CEFC was. And I think every American would be concerned if they could understand exactly what CEFC was trying to do. They were trying to implement their Belt and Road Initiative in the United States. Everything that we have bipartisan agreement on in Congress to prevent China from doing in the United States, CEFC was trying to acquire the services of the Bidens to be able to remove the barriers of entry into our market. So Joe Biden was working for the Chinese. He was the brand. Tony Bobolinsky is the second person on record under oath to testify that Joe Biden was the brand.
And what didn't he talk about? Millions and millions of dollars, and he mentioned all these other countries as well, and Joe's involvement, that he was directly involved in all of this, in spite of what he told the American people as a candidate and as a president numerous times, that he never once spoke to his son, his brother, or anybody for that matter. Is that all true? Million? Do we know how many millions at this point?
Well, we're well over 20 million that the Bidens have taken, well over 8 million from China. We found out today it was because of Joe Biden. They had no use in Hunter Biden. They certainly had no use in Jim Biden. They were paying for Joe Biden, the brand. And Tony Bobolinsky did a great job explaining that. And I think that the American people will be very interested to read the transcripts when we release them.
All right, let me ask you, Jim Jordan, let's get your take on the developments today. And I'd like to know, I know that your colleague, Congressman Comer, has demanded the DOJ turn over
look at those
Joe
pictures.
Biden's
You can't tell me that man
documents.
doesn't look like an old school mobster.
I'd also like the records of all those pseudonym accounts, email accounts that he was using. I'd like every single email he sent. I'd also like to take a look at Joe Biden's bank records. Is there any chance that we'll get a hold of all of this so that maybe you can put this whole thing together?
Well, what we really want now is we want the information Robert Hur has. And they can't hide, the White House and the Justice Department can't hide behind the fact that, oh, it's an ongoing investigation. The investigation's over. We have a 300-some page report from Special Counsel Hur. We want those transcripts. We want that information. We want the video footage. We want all that information as we go about doing our work. To the other point, Sean, I mean, this is called the money, the business, the brand. That's what was going on with the Biden family. And the White House story has changed so many times. First, it was, I never spoke to Hunter Biden about his business. Then it was, I'm never in business with Hunter Biden. And then, of course, Hunter Biden himself said, my father wasn't financially involved. We get the facts from all these witnesses. And here's probably the best one we got a couple weeks ago from one of Hunter Biden's business associates. When Joe Biden shows up at the Four Seasons restaurant for lunch, at the lunch are Hunter Biden, his associates, and 8 Chinese officials who are executives at CEFC, the Chinese energy company. Joe Biden comes in, gives a short presentation, and leaves. 3 weeks later, the deal gets closed, and $3 million gets wired to Biden accounts. That's what was going on. The money, the business, the brand, which is what they were selling. And Tony Bobulinski confirmed that today in his testimony.
The money, the business, the brand. Tony Bobulinski today. You had Rob Walker, a former business associate of Hunter's. He met with the chairman of CEFC, sought to create a joint venture at the Four Seasons in Washington. Has that been confirmed? And do you find both Mr. Walker and Tony Bobulinski, Jim Jordan, do you find them to be credible witnesses for your case?
Well, at that luncheon, Tony Bobulinski wasn't there, but Rob Walker was. Rob Walker, though, is the guy who wouldn't even tell us that the big guy was Joe Biden. I mean, think about that. That's unbelievable. But Tony Bobulinski obviously confirmed that the big guy on an email to Walker, to Hunter Biden, to all these folks who were doing business together, that the big guy was, in fact, Joe Biden. So, yeah, we did find Tony Bobulinski's story hasn't changed. The White House story has changed. The Justice Department story has changed about how they handled the Hunter Biden investigation. But like the whistleblowers, Tony Bobulinski's story has not wavered. He's just come forward with what he sees as the facts, and he's presented them to the committee and, just as importantly, to the country.
And Congressman Smith, let's talk to you about Tony Bobulinski and the allegations that he made and the things he testified to today, that he worked with Hunter Biden to create the joint venture, Sinohawk Holdings, with CEFC, the Chinese energy conglomerate, and said that he met with Joe Biden in 2017 and that Joe Biden, quote, enabled his son Hunter to sell access to the United States to our most dangerous adversaries, including the Chinese Communist Party, Russia, and more, and that he had direct personal experience, and it was clear that Joe Biden was the brand being sold by the Biden family. What's your reaction to that testimony?
You know, Sean, that's exactly right. Today, Tony Bobulinski confirmed what the 2 IRS whistleblowers said months ago in WhatsApp messages that they delivered to the House Ways and Means Committee that said that Joe Biden is the brand and the family business is selling the brand all over the country to all these foreign entities like China, Russia. What's also interesting today is that Tony Bobulinski, Sean, said that he named the time, the location where he sat down with Joe Biden for 45 minutes to talk about the relationship with the Chinese companies, Chinese government. And that was 3 years before Joe Biden stood up before the American people in a debate saying that his son was not involved in with any Chinese company.
Same question for all three of you. We are talking about the President of the United States that may have taken official actions as vice president that benefited his family. We're talking about Joe Biden not only just lying to the American people, but enriching his family by doing deals with some of our biggest geopolitical foes. Jim Jordan, I'll start with you. Where does this end? This is an impeachment inquiry here. What would be, what are you looking at in terms of possible charges against Joe?
Well, potential obstruction, potential money laundering, potential bribery. Those are what we're looking at. We got 2 more witnesses, Jim Biden next week, Hunter Biden the following week. We'll depose those. We'll see what they bring forward. But I think in the end, it's a tale as old as time. Politician does certain things. Those actions benefit his family financially. And then there's an effort to cover it up. And we would have never known about the cover-up but for the brave whistleblowers. But we got to complete our investigation, then we'll decide.
You said over 20 million. What crimes do you possibly see here, or impeachable offenses do you see James Comer?
Well, Joe Biden, to me, looks like he's violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. In that act, it defines what constitutes a bribe. And certainly, if you look at while he was vice president, the gifts that his son and brother received certainly meet the definition of bribery. So that's certainly a problem. Jim Jordan mentioned the obvious with the 6 different banks implied in their suspicious activity reports that there was money laundering, tax evasion, tax fraud, wire fraud. I think with the president's brother, there's securities fraud. So it's a pretty long list. Like Representative Jordan said, we're going to be hopefully getting the 2 final depositions together with the Biden family members, and then we'll proceed from there.
Are you thinking about maybe sending a subpoena to Joe Biden?
Well, we'll see where everything leads, but he's certainly a key player in this, obviously. We've learned from some of the previous interviews that we've conducted that there may be some more suspicious activity and another maybe account that was unknown. So we're requesting information on that. We're taking steps needed to issue subpoenas that will win in court.
Jason, what impeachable offenses are you looking at?
Well, Sean, if you just look, Joe Biden, the Biden family has been cashing in his position of power in government. We have numerous examples of witnesses who have said that. The IRS whistleblowers have highlighted evidence of that. Joe Biden's going to go down as the most corrupt, compromised president in our lifetime.
Prediction: will Joe Biden, as a result of the 3 of you and your independent investigations, be impeached? Do you believe that'll happen, Jim Jordan?
We got to wait till the evidence is done. We got to see where our colleagues are. But I think the case is pretty compelling.
Jim Comer.
I agree with Jim Jordan.
And Jason Smith, last word.
I'm with Jim and Jamie.
All right, 3 for 3. All right, we'll be watching very closely and reporting every detail.
All right, the most corrupt president of our lifetime. I can't wait to see the evidence. I don't know about you guys. They have released some of the transcripts, but not all of them. So I can't wait to see the hearings when they finally do those. But it looks like, speaking of hearings, that the Judiciary Committee hearing has started. So let's go over there and see what they are up to.
Appreciate all of your attendance today. Director Davis, thank you for being here. Welcome everyone to today's hearing on oversight of the United States Marshals Service. The United States Marshals Service is the federal law enforcement agency responsible for the protection of federal judges and courthouses, apprehending fugitives, transporting prisoners in federal custody, maintaining the witness security program, and more. Just over a year ago, Congress passed judicial security legislation that prohibits federal agencies and businesses from posting publicly the personally identifiable information of federal judges and their immediate families. Additionally, the law prohibits data brokers and other businesses from buying and selling this information and provides training for federal judges and their family members on best practices for maintaining online privacy. The law also authorized funding for the USMS to expand its Office of Protective Intelligence of the Judicial Security Division by hiring additional intelligence analysts, deputy marshals, and other individuals necessary to anticipate and deter threats to the judiciary. The legislation was named after Daniel Underl, the son of Judge Esther Salas, who was murdered by an attorney who had a previous case in front of Judge Salas. When law enforcement later found the attorney's body after an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound, he had a list of other people he allegedly wanted to kill, including 3 other judges. The legislation also came in the wake of Attorney General Merrick Garland's directive to the U.S. Marshals Service to provide enhanced around-the-clock security at the residences of all 9 Supreme Court justices. This directive occurred following the leak of a draft opinion in the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case. The leaked opinion ignited a series of organized harassment, including picketing and harassment at the residences of several justices. The threat became so grave that in June 2022, a man showed up to the home of Justice Kavanaugh with a handgun,
Thank you, David
tactical
Hurley.
knife,
That's so
pepper
nice of
spray,
you.
zip ties, a hammer, and other
Appreciate
gear
that.
to, quote,
The best.
remove some people from the Supreme Court, close quote, in order to, quote, stop Roe v. Wade from being overturned, close quote. The man hoped to assassinate as many as 3 justices because, in his own words, if, quote, they're more liberal than conservative judges, they will have the power, close quote. The would-be assassin acted just weeks after Senator Schumer, the Senate Democrat leader, stood on the Supreme Court steps and threatened specific justices by name. Quote, I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you've released the whirlwind and you will pay the price. You won't know what hits you if you go forward with these awful decisions, close quote. Despite these elevated threat risks, Attorney General Garland provided guidance to the U.S. Marshals Service to avoid arresting protesters unless absolutely necessary, according to training documents obtained by Senator Katie Britt. The training materials directed U.S. Marshal Service personnel to, quote, avoid unless absolutely necessary criminal enforcement action involving the protester or protesters, especially in public spaces, close quote. These events are clear attempts to intimidate and influence the justice's rulings in violation of federal law, which prohibits, quote, pickets or parades in or near building or residence, close quote, of a judge when done with the intent to interfere, obstruct, or impede the administration of justice. Unfortunately, not enforcing the law has become an all too common theme with this administration. We have a Secretary of Homeland Security that refuses to enforce our nation's border security laws. It should come as no surprise that we have an Attorney General that refuses to enforce our criminal laws as well. On May 3rd, 2023, Chairman Jordan sent a letter to Director Davis requesting documents regarding the Attorney General's directive to stand down. I understand that that Chairman Jordan received a response to that letter just yesterday, and I hope we can discuss that directive today. I have not had a chance to fully read that letter, but I intend to read it as we go along today, and we'll ask questions, no doubt. I would also note that left-wing threats to our justices persist. Just a couple of months ago, Neil Sidwani was arrested for leaving a voicemail for Chief Justice John Roberts stating, "I will effing kill you." I look forward to the director's testimony and having discussion on judicial security and the other important duties of the Marshals Service. With that, I'm going to yield back and recognize the ranking member, Ms. Jackson Lee, for an opening statement.
Good morning, and I thank the chairman very much. Happy Valentine's Day to all gathered.
Happy Valentine's Day to
I'm
you too,
delighted to
Ms.
be able
Jackson
to
Lee.
welcome Mr. Davis here this morning. Unfortunately, in the aftermath of a senseless revenge impeachment of a very fine public servant,
Really?
and
Gotta go there
Secretary
right away.
Mayorkas, I think as we are in the Judiciary Committee, we should make it very clear that was an outrageous act, a one-vote margin, political in its nature, and truly ineffective in terms of working to bring us together around comprehensive immigration reform.
She's festively
as well as
dressed
to
while
bring
giving us
together
that big
around
box.
effective policing, law enforcement, and giving the tools of law enforcement to all of our services. Secretary Mayorkas has
The fact that it
jurisdiction
wasn't a
over a
unanimous
number of
vote to
our
impeach
law
is
enforcement
what is
agencies that every day are putting their
actually
lives on the
horrendous.
line
The
to
fact that
protect
they
the
can sit
American
there and say,
people and
yeah,
to
I think
protect
it's doing okay.
public officials,
Is
and we are tragically
BS. That's a load of freaking BS, and we all know it.
engaging in the misuse of impeachment by voting on a outrageous action. And I, for one, I'm outraged about it, and I want the record of the Judiciary Committee to reflect the insanity of doing this kind of work as opposed to the work that helps the American people. So again, I welcome you, Director Davis, having been to the Judiciary Committee on several occasions. Director Davis has dedicated his career not simply to enforcing the law, but to the advancement of community policing, inspiring public trust, and enhancing accountability while improving public safety. For that, we thank you. Recognizing his extensive background, I'm confident that Director Davis is laser focused on meaningful implementation of the United States Marshals' multifaceted mission. The agency is as vital today as it was at its inception, more than 200 years ago. We rely on the Marshals Service, comprised of over 10,000 employees across the country, to uphold the rule of law, protect the federal judicial process, and ensure the safety and security of our communities. Each of the Marshals' key responsibilities are fundamental to the fabric of our justice system, and their efforts extend beyond national borders. From apprehending fugitives and non-compliant sex offenders to transporting and safeguarding prisoners and overseeing the management of assets seized from criminal enterprises, these duties are essential to the preservation of public safety. Because the Marshals Service spends more than $2 billion on housing detainees, providing their medical care, and transporting, it is necessary for us to examine implementation of President Biden's executive order that prohibits the continued use of private detention facilities by federal agencies. Many of us on the Judiciary Committee have long called for an end to the use of private detention facilities, due in part to a lack of meaningful oversight or accountability in the federal government's relationship with these facilities. That really has to improve. Confronted by security breaches,
Yeah, that's
overcrowding, and
one thing you may
misuse
not be
funds,
aware of, or
President
maybe you
Obama and
are,
now President
that
Biden ordered
even
a
all federal
phasing out of
prisons
these
are privately
relationships.
owned.
We're still far from fulfilling this mandate nearly 3 years later. It is our responsibility to provide support to those agencies, such as the Marshals, that are responsible for implementing the President's order. This leads me to another pressing issue the Marshals Service is currently facing, which cannot go unaddressed today. Above all else, the Marshals Service plays a critical role in protecting the federal judiciary, which is foundational to our democracy. The agency's commitment to safeguarding the judiciary or judicial process is indispensable in maintaining the integrity of our court system, particularly during this politically charged time. Let us focus on making sure that the Marshals have the tools they need to protect nearly 3,000 federal judges and more than 30,000 federal prosecutors and court personnel serving in federal districts, from the District of Columbia to the districts of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have seen more than an uptick. We have seen a tsunami of attacks against these public officials. Judges and court personnel are enduring threats and personal attacks with increased regularity in states across the country, including my home state of Texas. Just ordinary speech, however, it should not be characterized as being limited by our citizens. That we protect. What we are concerned about is any direct threats that may come about because of the position of the individual.
Those are illegal already. Prosecute them.
But this problem is not new. Threats against judges have increased steadily over the last several years. The Texas Office of Court Administration found that in Texas alone, there have been 522 judicial security threats since 2018, along with 29 assaults and 68 bomb threats. And while many of these threats were not acted on, we can never forget the brazen attack on New Jersey District Judge Esther Salas that resulted in her son lying dead in her home and her husband critically injured. Today, the crescendo of threats precipitated by political divisiveness and malicious instigators on social media is more than concerning. Serious threats against federal judges, those that require an investigation by the Marshals, rose from 224 in fiscal year 2021 to 457 in fiscal years 2023. And yet, it does not stop there. Serious threats against federal prosecutors more than doubled during the same 2-year period. It is up to us to support the Marshals in their efforts to protect these individuals. The agency is vital to upholding the rule of law and safeguarding our judicial system and our system of democracy, ultimately protecting our communities and our democracy. As we fulfill our oversight duties today, let us focus our energies on supporting their efforts. Thank you very much, and I will look forward to your testimony. Mr. Chairman, you want to recognize Mr. Nadler?
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Baby Jesus, you didn't
The
mention
gentle
Trump.
lady yields. I now recognize
Amazing.
the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Oh, here we
Thank
go.
you,
He
Mr.
will.
Chairman. Thank you for convening today's hearing on oversight of the United States Marshals Service. Welcome back, Director Davis, and thank you for being here today. The United States Marshals Service is the oldest federal law enforcement agency in the world. It has broad and varied responsibilities, and it plays a vital role in enforcing the law.
Did
and
he just say
keeping
it was
us
the oldest
safe and
law
secure.
enforcement agency in the
As the
world?
enforcement arm of the federal courts,
I don't
its
know if
duties
that's
include
accurate.
protecting the federal judiciary, apprehending federal fugitives, managing and selling seized assets, housing and transporting federal prisoners, and operating the witness security program. To ensure the success and efficiency of the agency, it is essential that we fulfill our oversight responsibility by carefully examining the operations, performance, and challenges faced by the Marshals Service. More importantly, we must be certain that we are doing all that we can to support the agency's multifaceted mission, which ultimately keeps Americans safe at home and abroad. I hope that we will take advantage of the opportunity to avoid party politics, and that we can delve into critical areas that should be of bipartisan concern. I'm particularly interested in learning more about the management of the Marshals' budget and resources, the implementation of policies and procedures that promote safety and the preservation of life, the responsible use of new technologies, and the protection of civil rights and civil liberties. The agency has an annual operating budget of more than $3.8 billion, with more than 550 offices throughout the country. Nearly half of its funding is expended to provide housing, subsistence, medical care, and transportation of federal detainees that are housed largely in local, state, and private facilities. That presents unique challenges because the agency is charged with protecting detainees in facilities that they do not control. Despite having relied on the use of private detention facilities for many years, the Marshals are currently tasked with implementing President Biden's executive order to phase out the federal government's use of private facilities. This was an important step because the contracts with these private facilities provided for minimal oversight, leaving Congress, detainees' loved ones, and the public clamoring for information about the safety and well-being of federal detainees. While I recognize that a deliberate process is necessary to carry out the President's executive order, including the consideration of logistical and due process concerns, I understand that the agency has continued to contract with some private facilities, often with the support of federal defenders and district court judges in affected districts. In some cases, the White House counsel's office has granted specific exemptions, but some of these contracts have been entered into by exploiting certain legal loopholes. I am interested to hear how the agency is working towards full compliance with the executive order. I also hope that we can examine more fully whether the Marshals maintain sufficient oversight of the facilities that it contracts with to house federal detainees. This is true for private detention facilities as well as state, local, and federal detention facilities. We must also closely examine the Marshals' coordination with other law enforcement entities and its response to evolving threats and risks, particularly since threats and inappropriate communications against federal judges and other court personnel continue to rise. There is an urgent need to understand the extent of the problem and to develop a strategy to address it, as evidenced by the tragic attack on U.S. District Judge Esther Salas that left her son dead and her husband seriously injured. The Marshals Service has many accomplishments to be proud of, including the arrest of more than 73,000 fugitives while clearing over 86,000 state, local, and federal arrest warrants last year. I also applaud the agency's earnest commitment to promoting transparency and enhancing public trust by equipping its officers with body-worn cameras. I'm hopeful that today's hearing will be a constructive dialogue across party lines that will enable us to address any deficiencies or inefficiencies that might hinder the agency's ability to fulfill its critical mission. With these goals in mind, I look forward to hearing from our witness, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The ranking member yields. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included into the record. We will now introduce today's witness. The Honorable Ronald L. Davis is the Director of the United States Marshals Service. He was sworn in on September 27th of 2021. Director Davis leads an agency with more than 10,000 employees and more than 500 domestic offices and 4 foreign field offices. He has served more than 28 years in law enforcement. Thank you for that. Starting with 1985 with the Oakland, California Police Department. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief. So help you God. Let the record reflect that the witness has answered the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. Director Davis, you may begin.
Mike, my man.
Turn on your little button in front of you.
How's this? Oh,
There
thank
you go.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As was mentioned, after 35 years of public service, starting in the military, over 28 years in law enforcement, with 20 years in Oakland, and 8 years as police chief in the beautiful city of East Palo Alto, and 3 years as director of the Department of Justice's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, I am proud to appear before you today to discuss the agency I now have the distinct honor and privilege of leading, the United States Marshals Service. As mentioned, my complete statement for the record is available, but I would like to take a couple of moments to highlight several critical missions of our nation's oldest federal law enforcement agency. But let me start with the most important factor to our success, and that is the women and men of the United States Marshals Service. Our workforce is comprised of dedicated, courageous, and effective professionals committed to our mission and the agency's core values of justice, integrity, and service. Let me give you a snapshot of just their work. In the last year, in partnership with our local, state, and tribal partners, we apprehended over 73,000 fugitives. That includes over 5,400 homicide suspects. We also recovered 495 missing and endangered children and assisted local law enforcement in conducting over 53,000 sex offender compliance checks. As outlined in the Attorney General's Violent Reduction Strategy, focusing on those individuals that are the drivers of violent crime makes our community safer. This success, however, comes at an extremely steep price. My deputy and task force officers have faced gunfire during 47 separate incidents over a 3-year period. Just in the first 2 weeks of this month, in February, our deputies and task force officers have faced gunfire during 4 separate incidents, and 1 local sheriff's deputy that was assisting our efforts was shot and injured. I plan to visit this wounded sheriff's deputy over the next couple of weeks. When I do, he will be the 8th deputy marshal or local officer shot in the line of duty that I will visit just over 2 years as director. Our work is exceedingly dangerous. It requires exceptional skill and sophisticated training and equipment. And as you can imagine, the daily risk is not just physical. They also include psychological stress to our entire workforce and their families. Accordingly, officer safety, morale, and wellness have and will continue to be one of my top priorities. We cannot effectively serve the American people if we do not take care of our most valuable asset, that is the men and women of the United States Marshals Service. I am grateful that the administration included $29 million to support deputy safety and wellness in the fiscal year 24 budget. I hope this committee and Congress will keep officer safety front of mind as it finishes this budget. With that being said, let me now focus on our primary mission of judicial security. Since our creation in 1789, the United States Marshals Service has been charged with protecting the judicial process, including safeguarding over 2,700 federal judges, and as is mentioned, over 30,000 members of the court family, including prosecutors, defense attorneys, witnesses, jurors, and other court officials. In fiscal year 23, the Marshal Service produced over 500,000 pretrial detainees in court proceedings and provided custody and care for an average daily population of over 59,000 detainees. We also provided security for over 800 federal courts across the country. The importance of the judicial security mission cannot be overstated. Core to our democracy is an independent judiciary that can operate safely without the threat of violence. This is why I'm deeply concerned with the alarming increase in threats against our judiciary and the violent nature of those threats. In the past 3 years, the number of threats against federal judges have more than doubled, as have threats against prosecutors and other court officials. We are also seeing increases in the use of social media platforms to target officials with hate language and violent rhetoric that has potential to incite violence. Additionally, there's a troubling increase in criminal swatting incidents. Let me give you a couple examples of threats, and these were somewhat edited to protect the investigations. A federal judge got a phone call from someone who said, quote, I'm going to kill you if you don't kill yourself, unquote. In another case, someone threatened to, quote, go to a federal courthouse and do a mass shooting, unquote. And as was mentioned at the opening, we cannot forget in 2022, there was an attempted assassination of a United States Supreme Court justice at his residence that was deterred by deputy marshals standing their post. These are just a few examples, but they highlight why the Marshal Service is now providing an unprecedented level of staff and resources toward judicial protection and risk mitigation measures. I must state in stark terms that the current and evolving threat environment facing the judiciary constitutes a substantial risk to our democracy. I look forward to discussing this risk in more details and outlining the measures we are taking, as well as the impact these resource-intensive measures have on our other critical missions. Please allow me to close my opening comments as I started by thanking the men and women of the United States Marshals Service. It is my greatest professional honor to work beside them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member, for this hearing. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Director Davis. I will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questioning. The chair recognizes myself for 5 minutes. Director Davis, is it true that the U.S. Marshals Service is responsible for the care, control, and custody of the January 6 detainees?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. It will be for those that are still pending trial, yes.
Very good. Okay. Are you aware of a Lieutenant Crystal Lancaster?
Offhand, no, I'm not.
Okay, fair enough. What about a Mr. Ronald Colton Maccabee, this former deputy behind me, who is a January 6 inmate at the DC Department of Corrections?
Mr. Chairman, I am not. Just remind you that we do have over 59,000 people in our
Fair enough.
custody.
That's just asking a question. You're aware, you're not. Director Davis, on September 5th, 2022, at around 11:45 a.m. in the DC Department of Corrections, Lieutenant Lancaster confronted Mr. Maccabee at the medical cart for not wearing his face mask. We were in the height of COVID. I got it. Not having his face mask. It's my understanding that Lieutenant Lancaster then deployed her handheld OC spray, sprayed it all into his face at close range. It's been reported Lieutenant Lancaster intentionally used these chemical agents several times against Mr. Maccabee without any provocation. As a former sheriff, did it for a long, long time, 30 years. So I want to talk a little bit about the use of this chemical agent, these OC sprays. In the use of force model, the use of force continuum, it would require that even if an inmate is passivity, the restraint, he's not being physically assaultive, an officer would not be authorized to use these chemical munitions unless the inmate was assaultive. If video footage were to show that Mr. Maccabee was not assaultive, would Lieutenant Lancaster have violated Colton's civil rights under the color of law?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Mr. Chairman?
Would Lieutenant Lancaster have violated Mr. Colton's civil rights under the color of law if he was not showing any type of assaultive behavior?
Thank you for the question. I'm not in a position to respond to or talk about any specific investigation.
Okay, all right. Do you know if, so you don't know this Lieutenant Lancaster, placed on administrative leave, like right away, placed on administrative leave. I placed deputies on, I had 600 or so. Placed them on administrative leave when there was some type of an investigation. Lieutenant Lancaster is on administrative leave, which I learned she was placed on it immediately after this incident, but I don't know where she is now, and apparently you wouldn't know either where this individual would be today that's been placed on administrative leave after the incident.
Thank you again. I just reminded that the custodial facilities are run by, not run by the Marshals.
January 2023, I had an opportunity to visit the DC jail. Spent about an hour there, spoke with the director, Thomas Faust. Are you familiar with Thomas Faust?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
he's the director. He and I got along. He's a former sheriff. I'm a former sheriff. We just connected right away. Great, great individual. The guys in the jail seem to be pretty concerned. I went into the pod where these J6 detainees, we learned that the officers all wear body cameras. So everybody has a body camera on in the DC jail. And Director Faust said the footage between Mr. Maccabee and Lieutenant Lancaster existed because I was concerned about this incident. People complained about it. The wife reached out to me, said, hey, my husband was sprayed with foam. He's a former lawman. He served 7 years. In fact, he later told me that I could come down and view the footage. I said, I got some complaints here. Let me come down and view the footage of this Lancaster spraying this, see if we have any issues. Later was retracted. You haven't seen the footage then, I'm assuming?
No, I have not.
Okay. In January, my staff FOIA'd this camera footage from both the U.S. Marshals and the Department of Corrections. The U.S. Marshals, who you oversee, J6 detainees, denied our request and stated that it fell within the D.C. DOC. We accepted it, thought it was okay. However, the DOC later denied our request and appeal because, quote, a release of such footage would constitute as a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy and is exempt from disclosure. I've got a release here from the wife. It's all here. He signed it, said, I'd like to see the video footage, right? He signed this congressional privacy disclosure to release the footage. I have it here. Lieutenant Lancaster is a public employee. The DC mayor's office determined Mr. McAbee's privacy disclosure form was ambiguous since the DC DOC is not a federal agency. Mr. McAbee's detainee of the U.S. Marshal up underneath you. And I find this to be a severe departure from the truth and a blatant excuse not to release the footage. My point is this, is that we have a problem here. I got complaints from the wife, got complaints from the inmate under your custody inside the DC jail, right? And now we can't get this footage. It stinks. It seems like she's on administrative leave. We got a problem. We have a severe problem. And my point is this, I'm not really even asking you. I'm demanding that you call the DC DOC to release the footage on one of your detainees. We should have a right to see this. If it's bad news and you don't like what it shows, we got to confess up to it. We got a problem here. In fact, I'm going to make it my personal mission to use every subpoena power that I can get from this committee to get this footage. I apologize to this gentleman. I apologize to his wife, Sarah, for having to go through this with no answers or help. So can I get a commitment from you that we're going to look into this? I have your assurance that we're going to look into this and get this video footage, because if not, I've got to go to DOJ. I don't care. I have to go to whoever, because I think we have a problem here and it seems like it's being covered up.
If I just may start by saying that I share your priority to make sure that those that are in our custody are treated humanely and within federal standards, and if there is misconduct, we are committed to investigating all allegations of misconduct. I will commit my team to work with yours to see how we can be responsive to your request. But as also mentioned, we have our 60,000 detainees in some 1,800 facilities. And so we also have to work with the local jurisdiction as well. But I am definitely committed to working with your team on that.
Very good. My team will get with one of you in the back of you before we leave this hearing. All right, I yield back. I now will recognize. Yeah, I got it. I understand, Sheila. Just getting good questions, good answers. This is good. I will now recognize Mr. Lather. You want to go 5 minutes or do you want to go? I'll give you the choice. We'll now recognize Ms. Jackson Lee for 5 minutes.
And I thank the ranking member. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Director, you have a lot of responsibility, and it's even increasing in light of the rising threats that we have against the judiciary. Let me find out how you are trying to implement the president's executive order, both former President Obama and President Biden, on the private prisons. And how many you have remaining, and what are the firewalls that you're using to ensure the constitutional safety of our prisoners?
Thank you, Ranking Member. As of now, we are in complete compliance, we believe, in the executive order with regards to private prisons. With the tremendous work of my team, we have ended the use of 7 private prisons and reduced the population inside use of private prisons, if I may say. We are still operating 5, but we are moving forward in full compliance with this order.
And so you're operating in 5, and they're located where?
I would have to give you, I have to come back, Ranking Member, to give you the exact locations, but we still have 5.
And do you know what the guesstimate of the total detainees would be in those 5?
Right now, the total population of detainees we have in private prisons is about 6,400.
Okay, and are you to affirm that you're doing everything you can for the safety and security, but also, again, the constitutional protections that they should have?
Yes, we are. And we are still working with the districts to make sure that we do inspections, that we are still taking full responsibility for the treatment of our detainees, whether they're in private prison or others. And so we would continue to work with the districts in the field to make sure that the standards are being met.
So my friend from Texas indicated incident that it is not your facility, obviously, and you have inmates in other facilities. How do you manage that when there are potential complaints against inmates in other facilities, detainees in facilities? You have jurisdiction over the detainees, that the facility is not yours. How do you respond to safety and security and constitutional protection?
Thank you for the question. We have a couple of things. One, each district, as mentioned, we have 94 U.S. Marshals, one for each judicial district that are presidentially appointed. They are responsible for the facilities, oversight the facilities in their district. We also have thousands of career professionals who do a tremendous job in holding these facilities accountable. We have some over 1,800 facilities that we use. So we have processes in our agreement with them that they're to meet federal detention standards. We have processes in which we will conduct inspections, some announced, some unannounced, to make sure they live up to these standards. But we also work very closely with the people that run our facilities. And a large percent of them, about 50%, are run by our sheriffs around the country, who we work very closely with to make sure that we're always living up to the conditions of confinement.
And Ms. Davis, do you consider full compliance on the executive order, even though you have 5 remaining facilities, private prisons? Are you in dialogue with the DOJ to say that that is in compliance, or you have a certain deadline of moving forward?
Yes, we are at full compliance because we have ceased the use of 7 and removed all of our detainees from. We have one that will be coming to an end, which we will not renew. When it does end, we have not renewed any new additional private contracts. And for the other 4, there were waivers provided because of, was mentioned earlier, issues of due process and logistics. But we are continually making sure that we will comply with this order.
Obviously, there have been some, I'd like you to sort of wrap your questions. I'm going to give it as a holistic question. Obviously, some earlier points were made about political speech, First Amendment protected speech, but dealing with the safety and security of federal judges. I'd like you to comment on that. Even SCOTUS to indicate whether you have in any way diminished your protection of those jurors, and then to respond to my concern on the continuing threats and attacks on our Judges Act legislation we're proposing, but dealing with the safety and security of state judges. So if you can speak to the protection of judges from SCOTUS to the federal, so that you can convince us that you've not diminished your service in any way, and then the importance of looking at judges in other jurisdictions. Mr. Davis.
Yeah, thank you for that. Protection of our federal judiciary is our top priority, and we do that in many ways. One, we provide protective assessments, risk assessments. We monitor communications of concern when it's targeting our judges. We have created intelligence units to track that. We also have increased our ability to enhance, thanks to Congress actually, with extra positions to enhance security, to do home residence. We have a home intrusion detection system program, which I'm glad to say over 70% of the judges have agreed to, have actually signed up with it. And we still try to prosecute to the extent that we can those that are making threats or attempted assaults on our judiciary. So we are fully committed that we believe strongly that the protecting of our judiciary is the protection of our democracy, that this independent judiciary must be able to operate without those threats of direct violence. And so we are responding. We are working with our other agencies to do so. With regards to your question about your legislation in state and local, I've talked to you about the legislation. Have not yet seen the language.
Yes.
So I look forward to working with your team as you proceed forward. But I would say some obviously recent cases in Maryland with the tragic assassination of a judge, and even one people witnessed in Las Vegas with the physical attack of a judge,
Yes.
makes the idea of judicial security is obviously just not federal. And so in any way we can help as you move forward, we look forward to working with you.
Well, I hope to get my chairman and my fellow colleagues to join me on legislation that deals with the insight that the U.S. Marshals would have dealing with state and local judges. But let me finish this last point, Mr. Chairman, if I might. Let me, you might answer this going forward, is the comings and goings of these federal judges as they travel to home, a district, home location, speaking engagements and others. It came to my attention that a Supreme Court justice was traveling and was rightly placed in a first-class seat for the protection thereof might have had someone traveling with them for their protection and was subjected, I'm not sure whether it was loud enough to be heard, to antagonistic comments. In this instance, why would this person have that authority to be in a first-class seat, but intimidating? I want to raise this question, and I need you to think about it as we go forward as to the travels and comings and goings, because our justices should not be subjected to that. Absolutely not. And we need to find a way to make sure there is complete protection of the comings and goings of our justices and judges.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Thank you. I gave her, just so you know, I gave her a little bit of extra time because my surrogate took a little bit of time over his 5 minutes. And so we'll go back to the 5-minute rule now. Chair recognizes Mr. Tiffany from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will honor that 5-minute limit. I want to do a follow-up, Director Davis, with in regards to Representative Jackson Lee's question. Is it correct that you folks received guidance to avoid arresting protesters unless absolutely necessary from the Attorney General?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. No, it is not.
So you were not told, the U.S. Marshals Service was not given guidance to avoid arresting protesters unless absolutely necessary?
The guidance from the Attorney General of the United States was to protect the Supreme Court justices' lives and that of their family and while at their residence, that we retained full authority to enforce the law, but also to make sure that we did not do anything that would place the Supreme Court justices' lives at risk. Lives at risk, excuse me.
Thank you, Director. We'll be following up on that. In regards to transporting prisoners that are in federal custody, how many of them are illegal aliens on your watch?
Thank you for the question. We do not track our detainees by that status, by immigration status.
Where can I find that information? And actually, Director, wouldn't that be germane? Wouldn't it be important to know that for the U.S. Marshals Service if someone is in the country illegally and you're having to transport them?
Thank you for the question. Again, we don't track by immigration status, and what we do factor in for transportation would be the offense itself, what they're being arrested and charged with.
You say, Mr. Chairman, maybe that's something we need to follow up in the future. Do you have staffing shortages in some of your offices around the country?
I think my marshals would say yes.
Is it true you're dedicating half a dozen or more deputy U.S. Marshals to provide armed personal protection for you?
For me personally?
Yeah, for you.
I won't get to the extent of the security measures, but I do have a protective detail, yes.
Does it include chauffeuring you to work each day?
I'm not going to get into the extent of the coverage. And I hope you will understand, because all of our details are risk-based or threat-based. And as a result of that, I just don't want to do anything that would expose me to further risk or threat, if you don't mind.
So the people that are on your security detail when you're at the office, because your office in Crystal City is a secure facility, is that correct?
Correct.
What do they do all day then when if they've come in, escorted you in, will escort you home? What do they do then all day?
I appreciate the question, but again, I won't get into what my detail does or any detail. There's a lot of work that goes into protecting more than just what people may see. And once again, I don't want to expose our methods or talk about to what extent or the size of any protective detail, let alone mine.
Was there a threat assessment conducted in regards to what your security detail should be?
Yes.
So there was.
Yes.
Is that available to us?
I will get with your team to see if it is, to make sure it does not compromise. One, I would ask that it not compromise safety or that of my family. Once again, because they are risk-based and threat-based, I would prefer not to have risk and threat, but this is where we're at. And two, that it does not undermine or release any type of method. So I do commit to working with your team to see how we can be responsive to that request.
Yeah, to be clear, the questions are done for the sake of accountability.
Yes.
I certainly understand your personal safety and your family's safety in regard to this. And Mr. Chairman, this I think would be another ask that I would make, is if we could get a copy or get an understanding of the threat assessment that this committee could evaluate if we would do that. Did your protection detail accompany you on recent travel abroad?
Once again, I'm not going to get into the level of coverage, and I don't know what travel you're referring to.
Have you and your office explored dedicating an aircraft for your domestic travel? So in other words, having an aircraft dedicated to the U.S. Marshals Service and specifically you as the director?
No, we have not.
You have not explored that?
We've explored, no, not for my personal travel. We are exploring aircraft for extraditions, for the transportation of our special operations group, for those operational missions in which commercial flight may not be prudent, but definitely not for my travel.
Do you have the numbers for what is the cost to the taxpayers for your personal protection detail?
Like I said, I can follow up with you. I'm sure we can provide you those numbers.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if we could get that, and I'm going to honor the 5 minutes here, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member for the entire committee, Mr. Nadler from New York.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Director Davis, the order to phase out private prisons was issued in January of 2021, so it's 3 years ago. In 3 years, you phased out 7 prisons. You've got 5 left. How long do you think it'll take to phase out the remaining 5?
Thank you for that question. As I started, we are definitely committed to full compliance with the order. It may be a little bit hard to answer that. We know at least one, the contract will end very soon, I would say within the next year. But for others, there are still the issues of logistics, making sure we have alternatives where we can place our detainees. So I think to give you a number, I would be very hard to give you that number.
Okay. Second, the Secret Service protects the executive branch. You protect the judicial branch. Many members of Congress have been many threats to Congress in recently. Senator Romney said that he spends personally $5,000, I forget whether he said a day or a week, for his personal protections. Do you think it in order for the Marshal Service to think about protecting threatened members of Congress?
I'm sorry, the last part of the question I didn't get.
Do you think it in order for your office to think about protecting threatened members of Congress?
I thank you for that question. The challenge with that would be our statute right now authorizes us to protect specific members as far as the judicial process, so we would not have the authority to do so.
Statutory change.
Statutory, yes.
Thank you. Have current appropriations levels presented any issues or challenges in executing the Marshal Service's missions? And if so, what are they and how are you responding to these challenges?
So the current funding measures for fiscal year 23, I think we are responding to the threats that I mentioned. We are putting in an inordinate amount of resources now based on judicial security because of this threatened environment. I am concerned about moving forward, and I think we have identified in the president's fiscal year 24 budget the additional resources that we would need to increase protective operations, judicial security, and other challenges that we're going to be facing.
And what is the Marshal Service's current policy on housing detainees with respect to distance from court?
We try to and thank you for that question, Congressman. We try to keep our detainees close to where the hearings are going to be or the court case. And as we move them around, then it does provide challenges with regards, in some cases, due process, access to their counsel, and obviously increased resources and costs to transport them. So it's not a specific policy. It has to be, we can really accommodate their trial, their hearings, if you will.
Do you believe that the federal justice system would be better served by a statutory requirement that limits the distance that detainees can be housed?
I don't think, I appreciate the question, Congressman. I don't think I can answer that. I would have to get more into the details because of this, a lot of variables. So I really could not answer that.
Okay, following the president's executive order, which banned renewal of contracts with privately operated detention facilities, the Marshal Service has entered into several agreements with local government entities that in turn have contracted with these same private facilities. Essentially, this has enabled the Marshal Service to do an end run around the executive order, continuing to house detainees in the same private facilities that they would otherwise be prohibited from contracting with directly. The White House Counsel's Office has granted a number of exemptions from the executive order. Why has the Marshals Service chosen to enter into these pass-through intergovernmental agreements instead of simply requesting additional exemptions from the White House counsel's office?
Thank you for that question. From my understanding, there's one facility that you may be referencing in Northeast Ohio. And from my understanding at that time, that was the best option that the agency had, that we had, as far as subcontracting with the local government, based on the time when the contract ended and based on the ability for us to maintain our detainees. So that was the best option.
Thank you. What oversight does the agency engage in when it contracts with private facilities?
Thank you again. As I mentioned earlier, our priority is still to make sure that all of our detainees are basically held to the best standards. And so we will still conduct the inspections. We work with the facilities. We do the inspections. We do regular inspections. And we work to make sure, and we have a process to make sure that we investigate all complaints that were mentioned and all allegations of misconduct.
Thank you. I asked about the policy on housing detainees with respect to distance from court. What about the policy on housing distance with respect to loved ones and with respect to legal counsel?
Thank you again. And I think that's what I was mentioning. That is a critical part of the process. And as you mentioned, is why it is, as we're moving forward with the order, that we try to make sure we don't move them too far because of the access to counsel, access to family. And if I just may say this, Congressman, that's critically important because nearly all of our detainees are pretrial. So they should be afforded the presumption of innocence, which means they need to have the ability to be close to their counsel as they proceed through the process.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Davis, Director Davis, for being here today. Over the last few years, left-wing activists have threatened our justices. After the unprecedented leak of the Dobbs opinion, Attorney General Garland directed around-the-clock security for all 9 Supreme Court justices. Our independent justices' lives are at stake. After the Dobbs opinion was leaked, the left-wing activists attempted to harass and even harm members of the Supreme Court. One individual was arrested at the home of Justice Kavanaugh, armed with a handgun, a knife, zip ties, and other weapons in his opposition to the Dobbs opinion. Just recently, in December, a man was arrested for leaving a voicemail threatening to kill Chief Justice Roberts. Considering all of the threats, the Attorney General Garland directed the United States Marshals Service to avoid arresting pro-choice protesters unless absolutely necessary. Director Davis, thank you for your leadership in protecting our federal judges. What was your response to Attorney General Garland when he directed you to limit arrest of protesters?
Thank you for your question. The Attorney General's order was very clear, it was actually crystal clear. Protect the lives of the justices. He made sure that we still had full authority to make arrests, but not to engage in any activity that would compromise their safety. I did not receive any orders from the Attorney General to avoid any specific arrest.
So would you have agreed with that directive if he gave it?
I'm sorry?
Would you have agreed with the directive?
I'm not going to respond to a hypothetical.
Let me ask you this. Any idea who leaked the Dobbs decision? I mean, we've got all these great arrests going around the country right now for certain activists, but any idea who leaked the Dobbs decision? Do we have any record of that?
Certain activists,
Well,
J6
thank you for your
activists, he
question.
means.
I think probably as the congressman know that would be, I would refer you to the Supreme Court Marshal, which is actually not part of the Marshal Service as they were doing that investigation.
Well, thank you, Director. I appreciate your efforts in certainly protecting the judges and protecting our system of justice. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back. Yield to the chairman.
Thanks. I thank the gentleman for yielding to me. So I want to cover your response that you sent yesterday, Director, to a letter sent not quite a year ago, about 9 months ago, on May 3rd, 2023, by Chairman Jordan. In that, he makes reference to Section 1507 of Title 18 and talks about the very things that Mr. Moore was talking about, which is why I wanted to dovetail with his comments. One of the things that he did is he noted that the training materials provided strongly suggest that the administration's continue to weaponize federal law enforcement agencies for partisan purposes. Now, close quote. Whether you agree with that or not, what he did ask specifically was for the production of documents, and he gave 4 categories of documents. And I'll read to you what those are. All documents and communications between the Marshal Service and the Department of Justice referring or relating to enforcement of 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 for the period of May 2nd, 2022 to the present. all documents, communications between the U.S. Marshals Service and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland referring or relating to the enforcement of 18 U.S.C. 1507 for the same period. All documents, again, same time period for the Eastern District of Virginia, and then all documents and communications between the U.S. Marshal Service and the Executive Office of the President referring or relating to the enforcement of 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 for the same period. The reason I raised that is because in your response, there were no documents included or produced or any communications, and I'm wondering if you can explain what your thought was in not including any of those documents or communications.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am aware of the response that we sent to the chairman. And I look forward to working with the committee if there's additional information that you requested, but we provided a response to the chairman.
But you didn't provide the documents, and that's what he specifically asked, Mr. Director. He asked for the documents and communications. And the reason that those are important is because it'll either corroborate, it's going to corroborate somebody, somebody's allegations or the position of the U.S. Marshal Service. Somebody's going to be corroborated, but we're going to get to the truth. And as part of our oversight function, we're entitled to those documents and communications. And that's why I'm wondering when you might provide those to us, or are you just telling me categorically that you're not going to provide those to us?
Once again, thank you. I would continue working with my Office of Congressional Affairs as well as the Department's Office of Legislative Affairs that I know has been in contact with the chairman's team to try to be responsive. We did send the response, as you mentioned, that the chairman should have received it yesterday, but we will continue to work to see how we can be responsive.
So that's really not responsive to my question. Are you going to provide the documents or not, I guess is the question.
I would work with the team to see how we can process the request.
All right. My time is up, or Mr. Moore's time is up, actually. So I'll recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ranking member for having this oversight hearing. Welcome, Director Davis. Thank you and your more than 10,000 employees of the United States Marshals Service, USMS. In your written testimony, and you've said it here, of course, you said, quote, "Safety is our top priority." Of course, you're charged with ensuring the safety of USMS detainees, the judiciary, as well as officers. I'd like to ask you a few questions about how you fulfill that mission and those important duties. And I'm thinking particularly of guns in courtrooms. As you noted, USMS is responsible for protecting the judiciary. Can you explain what are the procedures that exist to keep courtroom proceedings safe and peaceful? I'm thinking particularly, how do you make sure people intending to commit violence do not bring guns into courtrooms?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. And when you mentioned I just want to correct one thing for the record, if I may. When you mentioned the 10,000 employees, it'll be 5,700 employees, but I was adding as part of the workforce would be the 5,800 court security officers that I would now reference to now. That part of that security that you're asking about is to make sure that, as you know, when you walk into a federal courthouse, that we do have processes and magnetometers to try to prevent firearms from getting inside the courthouse. And that would be staffed by those court security officers.
And can you tell us about that? Is every one of these courthouses using magnetometers? And have you had any leakage of weapons in courtrooms?
Thank you for the question. Every courthouse does have that. I cannot think of any, but I can double check and make sure that we've had any leakage or as far as people actually being able to breach that location with a firearm, but I can definitely double check.
Okay. Or other weapons?
Or other weapons, yes.
Yeah, if you would get back to us on that, that'd be terrific. We're all alarmed to know that threats against judges have been rising steadily in recent years. Tragically, we've spoken about the 2 fatal shootings and the serious wounding, of course, of the husband of one judge. What are you observing in terms of these increased threats? Who's most likely to be targeted? And sadly, do you worry that deaths will increase if it becomes easier to bring guns into court?
So thank you for the question. I will start with the last part first, if you don't mind. And I would definitely worry if there was a way to bring in firearms and weapons into the courtroom. And so that would increase our risk posture greatly. The kind of threats that we're seeing right now is the challenge we have right now, Congressman. It'd be hard to say who's more at risk. What we're seeing right now is that people, extreme views, use the opposite views of any decision. If they're extreme, we see increase in violent rhetoric, increase in threats. So there's no leaning. It is just people that are, unfortunately, some are disagreeing with the opinions of the court or the actions of government officials. And they're resorting to either violence or threats of violence in response.
Thank you. Very sad state of affairs for our country. Do you do assessments as to non-detectable firearms getting into court?
My understanding, no, we do not.
Maybe you should. I think it's time to be thinking about that because we know the technology is ever changing.
Someone's a little obsessed with firearms
I
here.
wanted to turn for my last
thinking she's
minute
into
and a
gun
half or
control.
so to treatment for addicted persons in USMS custody or detention. What resources does USMS provide to addicted persons in your custody or care? Is there medical treatment like methadone available? Is there counseling? How long would somebody who is suffering symptoms of withdrawal need to wait before being treated, basically?
Thank you for the question. I will start by saying that obviously we're responsible for providing medical and health care to all of our detainees. That decision would be made by medical professionals and taking a look at what's the best response or course of action. I cannot speak specifically if there's specific treatment for addiction or different programs. So I would have to get back to you on that one.
As someone who worked
kind of
in
programs in our
addiction
various
programs
facilities
as a
across the country.
counselor, I can tell you,
Are
you
you
take them to
aware
the
of
hospital
instances
if there's an
of
issue.
folks going into withdrawal, suffering from the disease of addiction in your custody?
I'm not personally
I
aware of
also
it, but
worked
it would
on a
not
cardiac
surprise me.
unit in the
I
hospital,
would ask if you would to
and
offer
many
us
of the
a
patients
review of
there
that,
were going
and to see
through
what
withdrawal.
kinds of attention, treatment, care is given to those suffering from a disease.
So yeah,
And
settle
I also
down.
would ask
They
a
get
follow
taken
up
care
to
of.
some of the very important questions here about the private prisons, privately run detentions, that you would offer us a review of those final 5. What is the timeline to close the final 5?
I look forward to working with the committee or the group about continuation of the compliance with the executive order. So I can definitely work with your team on that.
Terrific. And I thank you again for your service to our country.
Thank you, ma'am.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for being here. I want to go back to kind of a theme a little bit about the Supreme Court detail that y'all have provided. In May of 2022, Merrick Garland, of course, as you discussed, issued or directed the Marshals Service to provide around-the-clock security for the judges. And in light of particularly the leak of the Dobbs decision, Director, why do you think people protest? What is the point? Not the reason why, or not the specific issue, but why do you think people generally protest in this country?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I don't think I'm in a position to speak for why.
It's to impact change, it's to impact policy. Is that correct? I mean, that's probably why they don't just go out there for nothing. They go out there to impact something, right? They go out there to make their voice heard and create change that they want, right? That's the point of a protest.
I can't specifically speak to that.
That's fine. And we can play this. We can play this game. So the question is Senator Katie Britt, back in March of last year, had a conversation with the Attorney General about some slides that were created for the marshals in the training up to the protection of these justices. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the slides, first of all?
I'm aware of the slides that the senator brought forward, yes.
Okay. Did the Department of Justice create those slides, or was it the U.S. Marshals that created those slides?
The training provided to the deputies on that assignment was provided by the Marshals Service at my direction and with my career professionals who, by the way, I think did a tremendous job, as that mission has been met every day for about 400 days, and they've been
Getting
very
into
successful.
feisty territory.
So were there instructions not to arrest protesters given by you or someone else with the marshals?
The direction provided to the deputies, and if I can say, it's been over 1,700 deputies have rotated through this assignment. And the message to them was very clear. It's the same as the Attorney General gave me. Protect the lives of the justices and their families. Deputies always retain full authority to enforce the law, but take no action that will compromise their safety. That was the heart and soul of the training.
Right. So here's the rub that I have, and the problem that I have, Director, is that for a month,
protests are happening outside of justices' homes in a leak of a Dobbs decision that was not yet decided, presumably, right? And so are you aware of 18 U.S. Code 1507?
Yes, I am.
What does that say?
I'm going to paraphrase, allow me
That's
to do
fine,
that.
yeah.
And basically, anyone that pickets or parades with the intent to interfere, obstruct, what it doesn't say just Supreme Court, any court official,
Correct.
right, at their place where they're presiding or where they're residing or may be at.
Right. And so they could be arrested, presumably, under that code section, correct?
Yes, they could.
They could be fined according to that code section, right?
Yes.
So why was that not done here?
If I may go again, once again, the primary mission for the Marshal Service given by the Attorney General was the protection of the Supreme Court justices' lives and that of their family.
Look, I don't dispute the mission, and thank you for what you've done to protect their lives. But they have received death threats, have they not?
I can't speak to the rest
I'm
of
sure
it.
they
That's in
have.
the media. So they have received
Judges
death
of all
threats.
kinds receive death
There
threats,
have been
right?
arrests. But the whole point is the code section is pretty cut and dry to me. There's no ambiguity within the code section. It says that if you protest or picket outside of a judge's or justice's homes, that they can be arrested. And so these justices, in fear for their lives, are like confined to their homes with these people outside that are threatening their lives, picketing outside. Y'all protected them. But I think the question is, why would we even issue guidance from the U.S. Marshals that is contrary to code that was passed by Congress in, I think, 1994?
Thank you again.
Good question.
The guidance given to the deputies would be to protect the lives of the justices. It was a protective mission to protect the lives of the justices, as the Attorney General has said repeatedly, and I will say again, retaining full authority to enforce the law as long as any action they take did not compromise the safety of the justices. And as the Attorney General also mentioned, I will say again, is the decision on whether to take action and whether that action compromises the safety has to be made by the deputy in the field at the time.
Director, this is where I have
Shouldn't that be standard?
because the law is pretty clear. The law says that you will arrest people for picketing outside of a judge's or justice's home with the intent of influencing their decision. This was a leak of a decision that had not yet been decided. And y'all look, I'm all for protecting the free speech. I encourage it, but if you look at this statute, it is very clear. The directive is clear that you shall arrest people who are doing these things outside of a judge's home with the intent to influence a decision. That was not done, and that's deeply concerning to me and the American people. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Davis, thank you for your testimony today, sir.
Oh,
I was particularly
it's
struck
Hank.
when you talked
Hank
about the escalating volatility
Johnson,
and
Mister.
severity of
I'm gonna worry
threats
the
against
island
public
will tip
officials
over.
and judges. We need to ensure that judges and court personnel are kept safe, and your officers are crucial in that effort. And I'll fight for a budget that gives you sufficient funding so that you can do this very important work. But I would be remiss if I were not to highlight the threat to your funding that exists from this MAGA House Republican Congress, or House of Representatives, actually, who proposed—
Is anyone else getting tired of hearing that? With everybody who
drastic,
disagrees with the Democrat, they're all of a
budget,
sudden MAGA Republicans
cut,
now?
of 22%. That would be the effect of funding U.S. Marshals Service operations at 2022 levels. This is what they proposed in the fiscal year 2024 budget. How would a rollback or a defunding of your budget affect your operations in terms of protecting judges, apprehending fugitives, protecting courthouses, and all of the other responsibilities that your department has?
Thank you for the question. I will point to the President's 24 budget that outlines what we have identified is what's needed to be able to maintain the security posture that we talked about, to respond to this evolving threat. And so
you actually needed more money.
Yes,
Not
that was
less.
a request.
But House MAGA Republicans are proposing to give you less money, how would that be devastating on your ability to carry out the responsibilities that you're charged with?
Congressman,
Absolutely
what I was
right.
saying is if
Kind of
we
put in MAGA Republican
ask for
every time you
additional
can.
protective operations to address the threats, if we were not to get additional resources or the budget or cuts in that, then we would have to make the decision that would have that judicial security is still the #1 priority, which means we would have to, this would have an impact on the other critical missions, as you alluded to, like fugitive apprehension, to recovery of missing and endangered children, because our primary mission is the protection of the judiciary. So we would have to then make sure that all the resources necessary to accomplish that. We cannot compromise the third branch of government under any circumstances, would have to be done, but I think it would have an impact.
It would have a devastating impact, would it not?
I won't use the word devastating, but it would definitely have an impact.
Well, thank you. Sir, in 2022, DOJ updated its use of force policy to generally limit the use of no-knock search warrants to only those situations where an agent has reasonable grounds to believe that knocking and announcing the agent's presence would create an imminent threat of physical violence to the agent and/or another person. Has that new policy resulted in a decrease in search warrant applications for no-knock warrants, no-knock search warrants?
Thank you, Congressman. I would say for the Marshal Service, based on our primary mission for fugitives, that we embrace greatly the idea that the very loud announcement, we make it very clear why we're there and who we're after. So I can't think of a time, and my staff can't think of the last few years in which we've ever used no knock. And so this has not had the policy, which we comply with, does not have any impact, negative impact on our ability to operate.
All right, thank you. And insofar as the use of body cam videos by your deputy marshals.
Thanks,
on
Jonathan.
their
Welcome.
arrests and executions of search warrants.
MAGA Republicans, welcome.
100% of your deputies equipped with
Agreed.
body cam video technology?
Agreed. The man thinks
Thank
an
you,
island could
Congressman.
flip
Not
over.
yet. We are moving forward with that right now. I want to say we have some over 1,700 deputies that are equipped. We are also in
1,700 out of about 5,500.
about 4,000 deputies.
Mhm.
So about of the 4,038 operational personnel, about 1,700 are equipped. But we have identified, once again, I'm gonna point back to the President's FY24, there would be sufficient resources to get to that 100%. So we're moving forward. As you mentioned, it is a priority of the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General. So we are definitely on target with the goals set by the department very well, but we definitely need to move forward and look at equipping the remaining deputies.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields, and I yield to myself 5 minutes to ask questions. So Director Davis, again, thank you for being here. My questions now are going to go to Executive Order 14019, which is from March of 2021. I'm wondering how many inmates have been registered to vote under this executive order?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think we'd have that number. We would not track how many inmates, or how many detainees actually register.
And so if you're not tracking, how are you facilitating registration to vote and their ability to vote?
So let me just clarify a question if I may, sir. You're referring to the executive order on voting access 14019.
That's correct.
So that the executive order requires that we provide our detainees, and as I mentioned earlier, just as a reminder, nearly all of them being pretrial, so not yet convicted, presumed innocent, education materials at their facilities about their right to vote if appropriate. It is nothing, the Marshal Service does not register voters or track who does register.
So, how, that leaves me baffled actually a little bit. So you don't know how many inmates are actually voting then, or actually requesting ballots or registering to vote. You don't know that.
We don't track that. That's correct.
So you got a number of Secretary of States have a problem with that. With that executive order. So I'm interested in the compliance. Then do you feel like you're otherwise in compliance with that executive order?
I do.
Inmates are allowed to register in states that typically require a specific amount of time to pass before an individual's voting rights are restored. So even though they're presumed, many inmates are recidivist. Is that not true?
I couldn't answer that, not with any certainty.
Interesting. So you don't get any criminal history on any of these inmates as you're just temporarily housing them. So you're saying we don't need to know about their propensity to violence or anything else?
Now, I understand the question, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm trying to provide accurate responses. I don't know the numbers or percentage of those that are in our custody or the 80,000 or 100,000 that we will process, how many have criminal histories. I'm not suggesting that none of them do. I can't answer the question.
Okay, so I really I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, make sure I understand this. So in Arizona, for instance, any term of supervised release has to be completed before voting rights of an inmate are restored, for instance, right? So the language in the executive order I read is fairly broad, to encourage and facilitate that type of thing, registration and voting. I guess my question at this point becomes, are you ensuring that the executive order is not contradictory to like state law? And how are you doing that?
Thank you for that question. The implementation of the executive order for the United States Marshals Service is working with our facilities, and I think you identified their facilities all over the entire country, is to provide them the educational materials about their access and right. We do not register them. We do not basically provide election guidance. It is about providing materials about their right to vote. And I think the executive order goes further to say as applicable or as eligible. So it's not it is for our executive order, for our part of the executive order.
That I get. So when you said earlier they didn't keep track, for instance, of somebody was illegally in the country or not, which would have influence on their ability and eligibility to vote, how do you determine then who
How
you're
do
going to
you hold
facilitate
someone
and provide this? You
without
just provide a
knowing
blanket to
if
it
they're
and say, hey, you
illegally
got
in
a
the
right to
country or
vote,
not? I would think that would be kind of a
you guys
crucial
don't
piece of
step in and
evidence
say, but not
or
you.
information.
You're illegally in the country.
But the implementation requires the facilities to provide educational material. Then it's up to the facilities how they do that. But I would just clarify that we do not process, we do not facilitate, we provide them the materials.
So we may want to consider this conversation some more later. And I'm almost out of time, so I want to ask this question. On the protesters that were parading and whatever, trying to influence and intimidate with regard to that particular Supreme Court decision, did the marshals, were they wearing body cams? Do you know?
I do not. I can definitely find out.
You said 1,700 deputies went through, so I assume some of them had to have body cams and had a video.
Yeah, I would think they would.
And the reason I ask this question is because I'm curious whether anyone went back. I get it. You were saying our first priority was to make sure the lives of the justices were
That's absolute
preserved, so we
craziness
protect
going on
them.
right now.
You got people out here clearly violating the law. And I'm just wondering, after that toned down and settled down, whether anybody went back through, looked at the body cam footage and started going after those people for violating clearly 18 U.S.C. 1507.
Thank you for the question. I have to get back to you about the body worn camera, but I will add this if I may, Mr. Chairman. In addition to the instruction, they were also trained and instructed that they had the ability, if they were witnessing anything of concern or crime, to call our command center. And our command center stays in continual contact with law enforcement partners. So if they saw something and made the determination, I cannot engage because it would put the justice at risk, then they can pick up the phone and call the command center.
Right, I think I understood that, and I'm out of time, so I appreciate that, but we need to continue that. I want to know more about that footage, and I would certainly like the documents that Chairman Jordan asked for earlier. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here today, and with that, we're adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I will note that you had submissions for the record, and we'll admit those.
He was ready to be done and out of there. hold on, let me get this going. All righty. Well, again, not what I thought it was going to be. Like I said, the Judiciary Committee, for whatever reason lately, is not putting up descriptions of what things actually are. They just give you a title and a witness if you're lucky. But interesting. So that at the end, and I love Mr. Biggs. He, by the way, is going to be one of the prosecutors as well in the Mayorkas impeachment hearing in the Senate. I think he's fantastic. He's big. Or not. He's Mr. Biggs. He's brilliant, is what I was trying to say. And that was an interesting question about allowing them to vote in the prisons or register to vote while in prison, and how is that regulated and how is that overseen? And it sounds like there's not much that they do to oversee that. And that's the big question we all have right now, right? Is or at least not all of us, but about half the country, let's say, about illegal immigrants registering to vote. Certainly a big consideration this year, let's just call it that. And apparently it sounds like not much regulation going on in the prisons. So, which not only for illegal immigrants, but some felonies. I can't remember which ones in the specifics about it, but I believe some felonies you either can't register to vote or you have to wait a certain amount of time, which I believe is what he was saying too. Yeah, agreed. Super interesting. One of those little secrets nobody knows about, right? And I also liked how they were asking. I think it was Mr. Fry. He's a Republican representative who was asking about the protesters, and I believe it was kind of pro-choice protesters. I'm assuming. I kind of missed part of what he was talking about, but pro-choice protesters protesting outside of a judge's residence, and basically kind of saying, why weren't they arrested? They should be arrested. And I know what he's talking about. He's comparing it to people, J6, those people, who were also protesting. And now we know, that they're talking about going after, and they're already doing it. People who weren't even in the building, who were just there, they're now going after them and prosecuting them, which is absolutely BS. So I understand why he was asking that. And it's a valid question. It's a valid question for sure. Our judges are actually really highly protected. There's a lot of different rules and regulations around them, and rightfully so. They make difficult decisions. Hopefully they make the right ones, not always, especially lately. But they need to be protected, right? It is a dangerous profession. You wouldn't think so, but it is. They receive a lot of death threats. And so I can understand how it would seem like, well, they're protesting. They have the right to protest. You have the right to peacefully protest is one of our civil rights, and according to the Bill of Rights. But I can also see how they would say not in front of a judge's house and kind of draw that line. Like, you want to go protest outside of the court, be my guest. But they do really try to protect our judges, as they should. It's not an easy job to be a judge. So interesting that they weren't arresting them, it sounds like. And I thought it was strange that the guy, what was his name? Hold on, I have it over here. Mr. Davis, he was the director of the U.S. Marshals Service. He was the witness. I thought it was strange that he gave an executive order, which really, there's something, I think Snoopy said it, they're hiding something, because, he was saying basically protect the judges at all cost, but don't do anything that would put them at risk, which I would think that would be obvious. Like, why are you requiring an executive order when they already need to be protecting the judges? That's already in the legislation. We already have laws about that. The judges are protected. If you call and threaten a judge, you can be prosecuted. Like that is a criminal act. So why an executive order states things that we already know, we already do. There's something more to that. I think he wasn't being completely forthright, Mr. Davis, about them holding back and not. Maybe that was a way they could say, well, we couldn't arrest them because we didn't want to put the judge at risk. Maybe that was the loophole that he gave them. I don't know. I don't know. But really interesting. A great hearing. I always love the judiciary hearings. They're really exciting to me. Sometimes maybe not so much to everybody else. But we are going to have another show today at 2. So in about 2 hours and 15 minutes ish. And I'm really looking forward to the hearing this afternoon. And thank you, Jonathan. Welcome. We had a little crowd here this morning. But it's always fun when there's just a few of us because we get to like a little more chat one-on-one, and welcome to the family. So we are going to do, there's a hearing at 2 today, and it is the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it's entitled Iran's Proxy in Yemen, the Houthi Threat to Middle East Stability, Global Shipping, and U.S. Service Members. I really want to see this one. So we have a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, a former CIA analyst, an NSC director for the Persian Gulf, and a vice president of Center for Strategic and International Studies. So that's going to be at 2 o'clock today. I hope you guys can join me. This is, I'm so glad. We love it too. This is going to be, I think, something that is really going to ramp up as time goes on here. This is something that I think we need to pay attention to. So I hope you guys can join me at 2 today. Nothing like a little terrorism for Valentine's Day. So thank you guys so much. And I'm going to take us out with a little music, and I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thanks.
Scatteringly as the days go, dragging us along like ragdolls. Make these moments move faster. It's our latest disaster. There's no place I'd rather be anyway. This will do for a while. Gather your thoughts so we can run away from it all and ease our minds. We'll try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Try to make it all matter, pave the way for the shattering of youth. Promise our real lives not far behind. Leave nothing to chance and we will not find. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Still, I'd like to be here for a while. Scatteringly as the days go, dragging us along.